When I was 9 years old, my religious school principal, digging too deep to try to get a confession out of me, beseeched me with these words. Have you ever seen an egg fry in a frying pan? Well, that's what you're going to look like in hell, because liars go to hell. Probably not the story you were expecting. Take a deep breath, it's all right. Thankfully, not all of my childhood memories were this terrible. I have some great memories, just like anyone. But being raised in an extreme religious group until I was about 12, and coming from a broken family, struggling with poverty and mental illness, I was exposed to varying forms of chronic abuse and trauma during my impressionable years. When most kids might experience an annoyed parent when accidentally spilling the milk at the dinner table, I was once kicked out of my chair for doing so and blacked out. Having sin beaten out of me, sometimes while naked with a belt buckle, was a common consequence for everyday childhood mistakes. When I was in high school, things started to slightly even out a bit. But when I was 21, I discovered that my ever-increasing nightmares of sexual abuse were actually memories. At the very least, I know that I am not alone in my experience. The uncomfortable facts are that many continue to be born into and live in high-risk environments. In America, 5.5 million children are abused a year. Our county of San Bernardino continues to have one of the highest poverty rates in the nation. And NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, reports that 1 in 5 adults go through a mental illness a year. That's over 46 million individuals hurting that we come into constant contact with on a daily basis. In this group of about 100, it means that about 20 of us could be in a dark place. These are very tangible numbers, perhaps in our neighbors, our kids' teachers, the clerk at the grocery store, ourselves. So what are we going to do about it? When I was a teenager, I knew what I wanted to do about it, in regards to myself at least. I desperately wanted to break patterns and fight for a life of emotional health through as much action as I could possibly muster. Whatever that meant, I knew I had to figure it out. Not having many emotionally healthy examples to lead the way for some of us as children, we naturally yearn for, seek out, and observe those we perceive to be mentally well off, happy, successful, so we can use their lives as the roadmap in order to learn how to live a better life for ourselves. So my logic became, if I become self-responsible enough, I will in turn become tough enough, thus escape inevitable poor developmental outcomes. Anxiety, depression, codependency, learning disorders, the list goes on. Thought it was a pretty good plan. Well, by the time I was a wife and mother, totally in love with my family, I found myself utterly ashamed at my emotional fortitude when compared to that of others around me. Why was I not measuring up? I thought that my plan was pretty seamless. By the time I was 28, I'd finally come to the emotional and physical points of needing to seek out a therapist for the first time. Please do not wait that long. This was a long time coming. My digestive system was practically shutting down, and I could barely handle everyday, simple responsibilities. I was in need of a better roadmap, one that provided some intense, nurturing support and healing. Well, thankfully, I actually found a phenomenal therapist up here in our small town of Skyforest. I was soon diagnosed and began treatment for complex PTSD. I had no idea that my life was about to be drastically altered up here at 5,500 feet in the forest of all places. But it was happening. You see, the problem was the old roadmap glamorized self-responsibility as attempting to do it all alone, since others will let you down, be who I'm supposed to be, and to have the equivalent tolerance levels of others in order to be strong enough. But through therapy, I began to hear my own voice. You know, the quiet, nervous person inside of all of us that we like to shove down and ignore because they're too stinking vulnerable. Well, mine began to get louder and more assertive, saying, "This doesn't sound mentally healthy, Natasha." So I chose to lean in and listen. And that's when I began my new journey to explore better definitions for self-responsibility and to write my own roadmap. Part of that new roadmap was I decided to go back to college to study psychology. So last fall, when I had the exciting opportunity to do my first research method study, I decided to research resilience and self-responsibility, of course. I hypothesized that self-responsibility would increase our resilience when compared to waiting around for others to meet our needs, whether it was God, our parents, or social programs. It sounds common sense enough, I know, but I craved those validating scientific numbers as proof that I was on the right path. And yeah, I know, I'm a total nerd, and that's fine with me. As I dove into the academic literature, I discovered that there are many variables that increase our resilience. According to the American Psychological Association, the greatest contributing factor that researchers have found is this: having loving and supporting relationships, whether it's from your biological family or not. And get this, resiliency is not a trait we're necessarily born with, but it's developed over our entire lives through our thoughts and our actions that any of us can learn. So after months of learning about the history of resilience research and finishing my own research, the numbers were in. And it turns out that my hypothesis was significantly positively correlated. So, being the nerd that I am, I submitted my resilience research findings to the Western Psychological Association, the WPA. I was so excited when I found out that my paper was accepted for presentation. So at the conference, I vaguely told the attendees that we should use my findings as evidence to teach people to use responsibility as a method for getting out of high-risk environments and to forge our own future. As proud as I am and I was of this opportunity, that's when some missing and vital facts began to unfold. And here they are. Our unique experiences and upbringings actually affect our cognitive and emotional states down to our DNA and our brain's physical structures. So, not all of us are going to be able to handle the same load of responsibilities and expectations at the same point across the lifespan. But we should be given dignity for what we can, because all of us have strengths and lives of worth, no matter our present physical and mental challenges that we're working through. But I kept all of these vulnerable ideas to myself. And that was when I was asked to share my research here at TEDxSkyforest. The clock was ticking, and I actually began to feel too vulnerable. I felt like a phony without what I thought was a scientifically reliable definition for self-responsibility. And after some time, I began to feel so conflicted at this personal impasse for me that I actually wanted to give notice and back out. I wasn't sleeping at night. I began to have nightmares and flashbacks that I hadn't had in years. It was just hitting a nerve to my very core. However, I knew that I was onto something and that I needed to move forward anyways, with courage, despite a terrifying unknown. So I kept scouring over my materials and rereading the definition of responsibility over and over again from the Ascription of Responsibility scale, and this is what it says. Responsibility is who one gives authority to. I had always been so irritated at this definition. I was like, that's too vague. But that's when it hit me that it was actually quite brilliant. And here's why. Being a lover of words and stories, I realized that the word author is a root word of authority. And then I noted that the negative internal language of depression and anxiety is a narrative, an element of literature in a story. I knew I was trying to ignore that narrative. So what narrative was I adhering to? Who was I giving authority to? Who was authoring my story? As the protagonist, the main character, I soon came to admit that I was allowing my story to be authored by someone other than me, when allowing myself to compare myself to others around me, to the other characters in the story. Although I was engaged in the action of self-responsibility, I was giving authority to society for determining how much it can handle and who I'm supposed to be in order to be strong enough. Not the answers I wanted to learn about myself. So presently, I'm learning to let my own voice determine those answers for me. Can I very well be the authority on this matter? Do I need to keep scouring the journals of famous researchers in order to validate my own insight? Do I truly need the numbers in order to believe what my own voice has to add to the data? Do you? My conclusion is no. And this is not arrogance, but a vital step toward courage. So here's my new context of self-responsibility and my idea worth spreading. Self-responsibility still needs to be taken, but by becoming the authority on what we can tolerate as we become who we want to be. Life can be challenging. We have a lot to do to change our thinking and to fight our way out of poor developmental outcomes. But just as life and stories can throw in unanticipated plot twists, and we relatably and compassionately root for the protagonist without judgment and accept them for who they wholly are, so we too can grow and adapt in our own time as our vulnerable and authentic selves. And in the words of the wise Mr. Rogers, thank you for being you.